thank you for that very generous introduction. I had a, I do have a sense of humor, but I might protest my own talk, but I won't, because I believe in what I do. I believe very strongly in what I do, and that it's important. It yields insights that we couldn't have otherwise, and so that's why I'm here today. And so I'm not giving this talk as director of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, but rather as a scientist, a neuroscientist, an anthropologist at heart. That was, in fact, how I got my start in academia. My undergraduate and my PhD degrees are all in anthropology. And then only after that did I turn to neuroscience to try to understand human nature from, in a sense, the inside out. So my job today, I'm just going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because I'm hoping to tee up our conversation, which is going to be super interesting. And our panelists are amazing. And as Anjan mentioned, what I'm going to do here is to kind of lay out, and this is the typical Wharton Neuroscience talk for broad audiences, business audience. So I'm going to kind of establish some ground truth about the ways in which our physical and social environments impact our mental health, our physical health, our well-being, in fact, our brains themselves. Make the business case for that. So you business leaders out there, why should you care? You should care deeply, and not just because it's interesting, because it matters for your bottom line. Then I'm going to talk about the deeper ground truth, our biological heritage. Okay, that's the other part of my life, the sort of deep biology work that I do. And then we will end with a little bit of a conversation about what can business leaders do? What can any one of us do to support ourselves in the face of all these physical and social factors that, impact us, and especially when they do in crisis or following disasters. And so this is a really nice figure from actually Paris, wherever he is a co-author on this, from Augustine Ibanez, we heard about earlier, this fall weather. Excuse me. And no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. So when we think about our health, our body, our brains, right, how that manifests is a function of what we're born with, right? Our DNA, the blueprint for our bodies and for our brains, but then also the environment in which we're placed. And that environment can be really salubrious or it can be really harmful, okay, as we'll see. And our brains, as I'll dive into in a bit, are really not designed for the environment that we're in. Okay, our brains are designed for an environment from 200,000 years ago. Okay, and the way our brains, the way our bodies, the way our mental health, our well-being actually play out in the current environment reflects that. So here's from one really nice study. This is just within Denmark, showing that your risk of developing a psychiatric disorder is a function of how much access you have to green space, to nature. This is a psychiatric disorder. Okay, here, well-being. This is across multiple countries. How much time you spend in nature, in green space. Okay, the more time you do, and this varies by country, and part of that's the nature of those countries physically, but part of it is how it's built into the culture. You spend more time in nature, more time in green space, you actually are mentally healthier. Your well-being is higher. Similarly, okay, our social environment, and those impacts our mental health and well-being. So economic disparity, inequality, if we look across countries, for example, the more income inequality there is within a country, the higher the percentage of people with mental illness. Okay, similarly here, okay, I think that's for the United States, right? So it impacts us directly, and this impacts the workforce. This is from, this came out last year from an APA survey, American Psychological Association. Toxic culture at work, right? That's a culture that does not promote connection. It does not promote belonging, right? It is not respectful. It does not create meaning, allow you to create meaning. Employees say, hey, yeah, work is really affecting my mental health. And if it's affecting my mental health at work, I'm taking it home. It's affecting my family. It's affecting my kids. And it's a vicious feedback cycle, right? You start behaving badly. You eat poorly. You might drink. You might take drugs, et cetera, in order to get through those times. Then you bring that back to work. Okay. And in addition, and we're going to dive into this in a bit, we've heard a bit about social connection, something that I think is critical. It's the secret of our success as a species is our ability to work together, to cooperate, to trust each other, to learn from each other. Hopefully you're learning something now you didn't have to go out and discover on your own. And yet, and this is, post-pandemic, workers are lonely. And I guarantee you, young people, how many young people in the workforce are you lonely? Are you lonely? Okay, see, let's talk later, because I know that's true. And even before the pandemic, okay, this is really robust epidemiological evidence. We know that being lonely, having lack of social connection, is not just bad for your mental health, it's bad for your physical health. It's, not being lonely is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Okay, because we need each other. That's what we're wired to do. That's the secret of our success as a species. Okay, so you business leaders out there, pay attention to this. Okay, here's just one piece of data. Workers who have mental health issues don't show up to work. Okay, that's just one piece of it. It costs about $340 a day on average for every missed day of work. If they do show up, they're going to be less productive, probably less creative, less innovative. Right? Maybe that contagion spreads to other people. And this is not counting the amount of money that now that firms are being called upon to spend on mental health programs for the people who work in those companies. So this is a huge issue, right? I think you guys are staring at me like, wow, holy crap, this is really a big deal. It is a big deal. More people should be paying attention to this. Now, disasters only make things worse. It's a volume knob for those factors that we just looked at, for the impact of physical and social factors on our mental health, our well-being, and our physical health as well. So here's the path of Hurricane Helene. As we all know, about a month ago, hit the Florida coast. I mean, this thing rapidly intensified basically overnight, Category 4 storm, but made it all the way up through the southern states and parked over western North Carolina. And over 200 people died. It's one of the costliest disasters in U.S. history. The human toll is evident, but there's a toll on business too. How many businesses were affected by this directly? Go take a look. It was really, really powerful. We know that these storms are happening more and more frequently. And it's not just hurricanes. As we see, there's hurricanes like Hurricane Ida, which actually impacted us here, even though it struck on the Louisiana coast by the flooding. My beloved Scoop Hill running trail was underwater. Historic cold waves, wildfires. We're in a drought. We have a level 1 fire conditions right now this afternoon. So all of these aspects, these impacts of the climate crisis are just turning up the volume on the ways that our environment, physical and social environment, impact our bodies and brains. And it can even extend beyond it. The impacts can extend beyond those who are directly afflicted. So I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but a large fraction of the IV fluids that are used in hospitals throughout this country were manufactured at Baxter plant in western North Carolina. Basically destroyed. Accounts for about 60% of the IV fluids that are used in this country. So if you go to an emergency room with nausea, dehydration, you're only about 50% likely to get an IV now. Okay, so imagine you're command of the healthcare system somewhere in North Dakota or Maine. You've got to deal with it. And these impacts are widespread. More and more businesses are getting hit. 1 in 10 employer firms reporting revenue losses. This in 2021. 1 in 5 employer firms owned by people of color. And it's really hard, right? It's really hard on these businesses in terms of their bottom line. And this really blew me away. And Benicia will probably talk about this later. If you look at the differential between minority-owned businesses and white-owned businesses, the impacts are much greater. They're much more likely to be impacted by these disasters, by these climatic events. And the financial losses are, as a fraction of actual revenue, are much greater for minority businesses. That's because they're often in marginal places that are more vulnerable, more prone to the impacts of these disasters. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like things are going to get better. And this is from a survey from the World Economic Forum, business leaders looking out 2 years and then 10 years.
So 2-year outlook, yeah, natural disasters and extreme weather, it's rating about a 2, it's like second. That was right behind inflation. But if we look 10 years out, it's like the top 4. Right? Are serious issues where this volume is going to get turned up to 11. And those of you who are too young to know the reference in the crowd, see me later. Now, our colleague, Augustine Ibanez, just published a really amazing paper over the summer where he did fMRI, so functional brain imaging, as well as EEG studies of brain function in over 5,000 people in about 8 Latin American countries and 7 non-Latin American countries, or vice versa. And he was basically looking at the impact of physical factors, physical environment, social factors, as well as neurodegenerative disorders on brain function. This is like a big undertaking, a big data project. But what you can basically do, what they did was to compute a brain age score. Okay, and of course, people who are experiencing neurocognitive disorders, their brains are essentially older than they should be, based on their chronological age. Okay, but there are other factors that are really important too. Air pollution, significant factor, significant impact. Makes your brain a little bit older if you live in an area with air pollution. Gini index, that's inequality. I live in an unequal society. Higher the inequality, the older your brain relative to your body age. And in fact, these impacts are much greater in Latin American countries, right, which have a variety of structural issues, as you'll agree with me, that amplify that. So we're looking at kind of double amplifiers. And part of the reason for this is because these environments are not the environments that our brains are designed for. This is sort of putting my anthropology hat back. So for most of the human evolutionary career, people lived in small-scale societies, under 100 people, most likely. They were relatively egalitarian. Okay, they lived in close contact with nature. They ate healthy, natural foods, right? And they were very physically active. And also, in particular, they weren't expected, this is number of calories produced over the lifespan from birth until old age. They weren't really expected to do much until they were, probably in their 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s. Spent most of your time as a young person, rather than kind of trying to grind it out at pen and get some distance between you and the next person behind you. They're following their parents around and learning a trade, learning how to hunt, learning how to gather, learning how to make shelter. And perhaps not surprisingly, when you actually go out, and this is very kind of rare data until now, like Haley Kaplan did, where he went out and he looked at brain imaging studies in 2 tribes in South America that are subsistence foragers, like the Chimani, for example. And what he found is no evidence of cardiovascular disease and no evidence of really not much evidence of anything like dementia or the neurological correlates thereof. Telling us that those environments essentially are the ones that provide the conditions for a healthy life, for healthy brain and healthy brain function. And the point I want to make here is that it's not just that our brains were designed for conditions of 200,000 years ago, they were designed much longer ago than that. We're essentially walking around with a 30-million-year-old toolkit, 30-million-year-old Swiss Army knife in our heads. And the impact of social factors on life, on well-being, in this case, morbidity and mortality, right, is we know that from studies in monkeys, sheep, whales, dolphins, horses, rabbits, marmots, you name it. All of these critters that are so highly social and depend on each other for health and survival, for all of them, having social advantages, so high social status or lots of friends, or hopefully both, do really well. Or they're going to live longer, healthier, happier. I don't know if they're happier, but longer, healthier lives. And the converse is true. They're low status. If they're lonely, have no friends, they don't do so well. And so for that reason, and for many reasons, I've been studying these critters, rhesus macaques, for like the last 30, embarrassed to say for how long I've been studying them in the wild and in the lab. And these rhesus macaques are, we've been separated, probably our common ancestor, for about 28 million years. But they're beautiful animals in their own right, but they tell us so much about how our own brains and our own bodies work, the way that our DNA interacts with the environment to translate into health and performance. So these animals share about 95% of our DNA. Their brains are wired up in exactly the same way ours are, and not the way a mouse's brain is. Okay? Their behavior is very, very similar to ours. So they live in these large mixed sex groups. Monkeys form dominance hierarchies. That status is, as I'll show you in a moment, a critical factor for determining access to resources, and they make friends. Just like people, a monkey who has more friends lives a longer, healthier life, and they have more babies, which is kind of the equivalent of us making more money. Okay, so they're more successful. And a lot of our work happens down here on an island called Cayo Santiago, which is off the coast of Puerto Rico, and is a really beautiful place. I encourage you to visit if you're interested. And in 1938, a founding population of 400 rhesus macaques from across Southeast Asia, South Asia, was transplanted here as a sort of natural experiment. And the population has grown, typically somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 animals. They live freely. They do what they want. We provide them with a little bit of monkey chow, and that's about it. And they lead their lives. We have researchers on the ground who follow them around every day. Wouldn't want people doing that to you. But we can get a level of granularity of behavioral data on them. We just can't get from people just by tracking their smartphones. And then once out of every year, about a month out of every year, we have a big monkey rodeo where we round them up and we trap them, and we get all kinds of biological samples. So we get blood, we get cerebrospinal fluid, we can take other kinds of measurements, we can get DNA, you name it. And so this gives us an exquisite ability to connect the biology of these animals, their environment, physical and social, right, to their brains and to their behavior, and ultimately to their survival and success in the world. Sorry. And so we know that monkeys who, for example, have higher status, get priority of access to resources, to food, water, mates, etc. Same if you have more friends. If you have more friends, it's kind of like you've got power in numbers. And you can outnumber others. But this is also true in terms of survival as a function of injury. So monkeys who are higher status are less likely to get beaten up. If you're low status, you're more likely to get beat up. If you have more friends, you're not going to get beat. If you don't have any friends, you are. It sounds pretty familiar. So this directly translates into survivorship of animals. And echoing what Augustine found with humans, but at a really much deeper level, we were able to, for example, in one study, which we published a couple of years ago, my great colleagues, Amy Chu and Noah Snyder-Mackler, who's a Penn graduate, we profiled millions of neurons across multiple parts of the brain, multiple brain areas, and we sequenced we did gene expression analyses, what's happening in these individual neurons. Okay, which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. Okay, and there's a lot of interesting data in that, but one thing that I want to point out to you is we can create, just like Augustine for the human imaging and EEG data, we can create a molecular clock for the age of the neurons in these monkeys' brains. And when we do that, what we find, and this is the kind of key take-home point, monkeys who have high status, their brains are younger. They're younger, they're healthier at the molecular level. Okay, that's deep. That's super deep. That determines everything else that's going on in the brain. Now, that was sort of, just steady state. But in 2017, much like Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. You're probably all familiar with that. Certain Yes. So it was a Category 4 storm when it hit the mainland of Puerto Rico, unleashed devastation and destruction. More than 3,000 people lost their lives. It also caused an epidemic of mental health problems. So anxiety, depression went up, suicides went through the roof, and a brain drain from the island. People fled the island. A lot of that has not been fixed yet. Okay. Now that hurricane hit our Cayo Santiago, our Monkey Island first, and it was actually a Category 5 storm, had 175-mile-an-hour winds. Hit the island. This might be loud. We didn't know what happened. We hired a helicopter to go first check on all our people who were fine, thankfully. But now this is a flyover of Cayo Santiago, which is normally really green and beautiful, as you saw, and it's like a bomb. Right, so it's just utter devastation. Miraculously, all the monkeys survived the storm itself. I'm not sure how they did that. But then there was an uptick in mortality because they lacked access to fresh water and fresh food. How many minutes do I have there? 5. Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. I give a little. It was really devastating, right? There was this uptick in mortality because they're eating seaweed and drinking seawater. But then what's amazing about this, and this is a real credit to the people who took medication, we're able to continue the studies, okay, within days of this hurricane. People were even, their own homes were not rebuilt yet, and they're back out on the island following the monkeys. And we've got a whole bunch of data that you just can't get, in other circumstances. So basically what Hurricane Maria did was to trigger premature aging of the body, for example. So here are measurements of hip extension, so flexibility. Think about like any of you older people out there who might have been running your whole lives. Like I can't run anymore. My knees just don't work. So here, the blue curve is as a function of age, your hip flexibility. Just think about it, how good your skeletal muscular system is working. You can see it falls off, but it's okay. 1 year after the hurricane, this is a different group. So teenage monkeys look like, elderly, and then it's worse another year. So there's just amazing physical wear and tear. What's going on? What's going on is that the molecular landscape of their bodies has changed. And this is a function of stress. So I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but basically what I'm showing you here is that a molecular clock based on their blood, immune cells in the blood. And what we find is that here's before the hurricane, here's after. So the monkey population on average aged about 2 years. So that's the equivalent of 8 years. I don't think we would want. Now think about all these people who experienced all of these hurricanes just recently. Now this was pointed out earlier. One of the really interesting things here is that's the average. Some do way worse. Some seem to be very resilient. And that's of course, the holy grail. What's making them resilient? And the first, most important way that these monkeys adapt, just like people, is to change their behavior. Right? And what did monkeys do in response to this hurricane? Did they fight with each other? Did they compete over every last scrap? No, they did the exact opposite. Up here is, on the top is a map of social networks with groups of monkeys. And this red line is when the hurricane happens. What you can see is they get really dense. The monkeys reach out and they make friends with as many monkeys as they can. This is their average tolerance, how long they spend sitting next to other monkeys. It basically almost doubles, and their aggression goes way down. They're systematically friendlier, nicer, and they're investing in social relationships. That's what they spend their time doing. And remarkably, and we just published this a few months ago, the friendlier a monkey is, the more likely they are to survive. So the blue curve here, this is survival. This is over 6 years. So this is a long time. Blue curve, monkeys who have the most friends and the most tolerant, they got a 50% year in, year out advantage in survivorship over the monkeys here in red, who aren't very tolerant, who don't make friends, right? And so the big question is like, why? How does this help? We don't really understand a lot about that, but one way is that it's an instrumental source of resilience. So one thing that we found that, this is Cayo Santiago before. Here's immediately thereafter. You can see that all the trees have been killed, and now they're really good. I mean, it's gone from a forest to a savanna. Rhesus macaques live in savannas, okay, in India and South Asia. They also live in forests. They live in Himalayas. They're very well adapted. And so this environment is now 7 degrees hotter Celsius. So it's right at the limits of thermoregulation. Like if you had to stay there and live there, you might not survive. It's right up there. It's superhuman there. And so what's going on is that, and we've established this now, is that in the morning, when it's really cool out, They go out into the open. This is in the afternoon. In the morning, when it's really cool out, they actually go out. They don't just go out and be alone. They spend all their time working on their connections, working on their friendships. This is like team building. You team build in the morning so that when things get really bad in the afternoon, it's super hot, you can find a place to sit and shade. And it's really interesting when you look at, for example, other places where it's extremely hot now, climate change. It's in India during one of the major heat waves in the last 2 years. Very similar kind of behavior, trying to seek out respite from otherwise intolerable and deadly heat. And we're beginning to get hints about how the monkeys did this. This is the difference. What I'm plotting here is the size of different brain structures before the hurricane versus after. And what we're finding is that these areas that are different, that they're getting bigger, are the parts of the brain that, in absence of a hurricane, allow monkeys to make friends, to make connections with each other. So there's this mid-STS region, which is, for the aficionados, the homologue of the human temporoparietal junction, TPJ, that's involved in making predictions and cooperating. And then this other part of the brain, the insula, which is involved in empathy. Okay, so both of these areas, the more friends you have, the bigger they are. So we think what's happening is that some monkeys have the wherewithal, we just don't know exactly the source of that, to turn that up in the brain. And those brain structures get bigger. We heard a lot about neuroplasticity today. So working on these things, right? Connecting, taking the time to work on a relationship will change your brain in good ways. And these good ways, having a partner present, for example, we've shown when you are threatened, reduces all the brain response, all the brain activity that's normally associated with a threat. If you've actually got social support present, then you just stay at baseline and you persevere. And so you don't have that arousal response. You don't have that, unleashed on your body. Presence of a partner. What does this all mean for resilient leadership in the workplace? I know I got to wrap up. And I just want to point out, this is beautiful data from Microsoft's Work Lab. I encourage you all to attend to it. I'm an advisor to this Work Lab. And this looked at 3 million workers during 2022. Okay, at a whole bunch of different companies. And what's being plotted here is, the shading is indicating engagement. And this is an index that's constructed from a bunch of different self-report measures that indicate how many friends do I have at work? How engaged do I feel? Does the company have my back? Am I doing meaningful work? Are they compassionate? All those kinds of things. And those companies that have highest engagement, that is, their leaders are investing in cultures that support workers, they outperform the S&P 500. So, even if you don't care about people, I think you should care about people because they're worthwhile, they're inherent value, and all you care about is the bottom line. What does this tell you? Right? And so I really like this. This is a part of the U.S. Surgeon General report that they I was swallowing, and sorry, around my mind, but he's actually put into this, and actually the work he's doing, put into this report a number of different kind of guidelines for leaders, making this connection a strategic priority in the workplace, give managers and leaders the power and resources to implement it, right? And also to consider the opportunities for doing so outside of the workplace. And I'll finish with just one little final factoid from a paper that Peter Sterling and I published a couple of years ago in JAMA Psychiatry. This is a paper about the epidemic of deaths of despair in the United States. And we wondered what's different about the United States versus other industrialized countries. And one thing that we found, there are a number of differences, but one thing that really stood out is paid time off. You can see all these countries. There's zero. So time off is necessary, not just to rest, but also to reconnect with your families, with your friends, to engage in play, to make music, to go have fun together, right? To be joyful. That's part of the human toolkit. And look, we just ain't doing it. And so we have to do better. And with that, I appreciate your attention and for letting me go over and look at our great.